Hello, 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 and welcome to a show called The History of Random Stuff, or as I like to call it, Horse. And speaking of horses, those guys are weird, right? I mean, they've been around forever, and our world would be entirely different had we not tamed them and made them take us to places. But then nowadays people hardly ever see horses outside of carnivals and rich people houses. And that happened because everyone has cars, because it makes more sense to own something that can have 250 horsepower as opposed to 1 horsepower. But how did we make it that far? And what happened along the way? Well, all those questions and more will be answered in the coming video, because the underlying thesis here is that people have always depended on transportation to get around, but the practice has become drastically different as time went on. That being said, we should get on with the video. You ready? Let's begin. To start off the top, we'll have to go all the way back to a time that was a very long time ago. Like, a really long time. Around 10,000 years ago, humans discovered that they had the ability to tame wild animals, and it's estimated that the first ones to be domesticated were sheep and goats. But not long after that, we got around to taming larger animals like camels, oxen, horses, and donkeys, or even llamas in South America. And this was an important advancement because that meant humans gained the ability to go around places without having to walk on their own 2 feet. Instead, they could force something else to walk on their own 4 feet, and we reaped all the benefits of doing that. Cut to a few millennia later, and that thing that made us all this not walking stuff even easier is the wheel. Now, I should mention that the existence of round objects that could roll around had existed long before then, but the idea of an actual wheel that could be attached to something and still get around without also rolling the thing it was attached to didn't come to fruition until about 3500 BCE. And boy did it come. Everyone had wheels. The farmer had wheels, the king had wheels, even your mother had wheels. We started seeing things like horse-drawn wagons, ox-pulled wagons, all kinds of wagons. They even had carriages, which are basically just wagons for rich people, and wheel is to blame for all of it, because the wheel was hands down one of the most important technological advancements in human history, right alongside toilet paper and 24/7 diners. But that's where most of the advancements stopped. Well, at least in terms of land travel. There are a couple other ways of getting around that we haven't talked about, but our focus today is solely on land-based travel. But what you should know is that the majority of the following centuries mainly had advancements on ocean-faring expeditions. You know, spice trade, ocean warfare, all that good stuff. So we've got a bit of a gap to jump over. There are some minor things that one might consider important, so we'll get that over with. There are a few advancements in navigation technology. People started making maps, and they built a bunch of roads and trails. Basically, it was a bunch of stuff to make sure no one got lost, which is good for sure, but not very cool. Skip ahead all the way to the year... Well, there are a few years we could stop at, because one thing happened, and then something happened based off of that something that happened, and then a third guy did another thing after that. And I know I'm being a little vague here, so let's just get into it. I'm talking about the invention of the steam engine. Our first time stop would be in Greece during 1st century AD, at the home of a man known only as the Hero of Alexandria, who was an inventor. He made a toy that used the power of fire and steam to make a ball rotate, and he called it the Aleopile, the Ileopile, the this word. And the thing about this word was that it really was just a toy. It had no functional use outside of novelty, but this remains important as it was the first recorded instance of a device using steam to rotate. And our next stop is over in America during the year 1606, where a coal miner named Jeronimo de Ayans used steam-powered rotary devices to get water out of flooded mines. This helped a lot considering how often mines would be flooded back then. And the third stop would be nearly a century after that in Europe, when three different inventors would work off of each other to develop a steam engine with two tanks on a piston-based system to function better than Ayanz's original design. It worked exceptionally well for removing water from flooded mines, the only issue being that it overheated pretty quickly. That was until two new guys named James Watt and Matthew Boulton stepped into the ring and built a new engine that didn't overheat and came with a device called a centrifugal governor that allowed the user to control how fast the engine moves. Now you may be asking now, why am I talking about any of this? I haven't even said the word horse at all in the past 2 minutes. How is this still relevant? Well, the answer is simply that this new steam engine came with many new uses. One of them being the invention of a train. Now, it should be mentioned that railways and rail carts already did exist, but those were made mostly for mining and not for transportation. The existence of a train powered by a steam engine didn't reach the world until the mid-1760s, when Matthew Murray took the time to do just that. But again, it was still only used for transporting mining goods. There were a few instances of it being used for transportation, and in turn had a few growing railroad companies. But the whole thing didn't pick up steam. Get it? Pick up steam? Like steam engine? We have fun here. Anyway, it didn't become a big thing until the development of a small advancement formerly known as the Transcontinental Railroad. In the year 1862, under the presidency of Lincoln, Congress signed up the Pacific Railroad Act, which hired two companies, the Central Pacific Railway Company and the Union Pacific Railway Company, would work together to build a railroad across nearly the entire country. Fun fact, the cost to travel from one end of the country to another would be $150 via a railroad. Before the railroad was completed, it would cost nearly $1,000, and that's 1860s money. It would be a lot more today. Not to mention that the travel time was reduced dramatically. And the good didn't stop there. Advancements continued to be made in steam engine technology, and people began to incorporate them more and more into their lives. It even reached the point where in 1904, New York opened up its first subway route. But these trains were underground, meaning it would be bad if they had steam engines blowing smoke all over the place. Instead, they had to come up with a whole new way for trains to move. And what they did was have electricity run through the rails and power the train through contact. And it worked because these trains were traveling rather short distances. And that is what developed into our modern day metro systems. Trains let people get around faster and cheaper than ever before. But it wasn't the only way. We've been ignoring another major contender in this race, and we're nearing the end here, folks, because it's time to talk about cars. Alright, we're cutting it close on time, so we're going to start speeding up a bit. Now here's the thing though, no one really knows for sure who invented the car, because the idea of one had been around as long as the train. They just took a while to figure out how to make it steer without being on a rail. But it was eventually figured out by these following people all separately. And after the car was invented, it became famous immediately, but still hardly anyone owned one because they were just too dang expensive. That was until the year 1913 when a man named Henry Ford unveiled his assembly line, which made these horseless carriages cheaper and easier to make, which in turn made them cheaper and easier to buy. It was Henry Ford's personal message that, "When I'm through, just about everybody will have an automobile." Why he wanted everyone to own one, I don't know, but what I do know is that his plan worked. Cars suddenly became relatively cheap, and people were able to buy them. And in the long run, it became easier than maintaining horses, because no one had to make sure their car was getting enough oats in its diet. It even reached the point where President Eisenhower signed off on the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which started the construction of our very own interstate highway, thus connecting every state in America with a bunch of super long roads. Well, almost all of America. Almost. But anyway, construction of the highway system was finished with 46,000 miles of road, which brings us all the way forward to today, where we have all the stuff of the past and the advancements along with it. The most major one being the development of electric cars, which completely abandon the whole burning fossil fuels to make steam and smoke and rotate stuff type deals, and instead, it just doesn't do that. Long story short here is that humans have always needed other things to get around, and the advancement of those things led to the next advancement, which led to the next. So while they may be drastically different, they are all very closely connected. So the next time you get on a spaceship headed to the moon, just take a moment to reflect and thank horses for getting you to that point. And okay, but until they can get a horse to fly around in space, I'm not even gonna bother. I'm done.